Greetings, citizen. Welcome to the show, and thank you for listening. For more of the art of wargaming in your life, definitely check us out on Instagram and Facebook. If you'd like to support the show, we have a Patreon account where you can do just that for as little as $1 a month. What we can offer will expand as the show does. If you don't have extra funds but would still like to help us out, you can give us a like, share, or 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. Want to get in touch? Feel free to message us or hit up our email, artofwargamingpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you because we know the world is vast, with many different ideas on tactics and strategy that can be applied to the games we enjoy.
You're listening to the Art of Wargaming on the Earworm Network.
The Saga of Ref the Sly. Part 2.
Welcome to the Art of Wargaming on the Earworm Network. I am Yaga Malark. Today's episode concerns Part 2 of the Saga of Ref the Sly. For those of you following along at home, that is 6 through 13. Stanzas, verses, the little sections. You see the numbers, you know what I'm talking about. So, before we get into that, however, I want to talk to you just a little bit. This is not very much. We're going to jump into it pretty quick. But I did want to brag a little bit about the Redbubble. It is actually full of stuff now. Our digital design editor, wife person, has put in so many hours making sure that everything we got on there is absolutely fantastic. Even if you don't intend to buy anything, I would recommend going on there just to see the kind of design she put together. For instance, each of the season photos, we're actually going to buy one of each so that we can put them on our couch. Yeah, we're nerds. Not that you have to do the same. If you want to, that's cool. But yeah, so that's up there. Some amazing stuff. Just go have a look. Even stuff that isn't necessarily really super Art of Wargaming. I know, like, personally, even if I super like a brand, I don't necessarily want their name on me or to like do some free advertising or whatever. So we've got some stuff on there too that is just cool stuff that doesn't necessarily say the Art of Wargaming on it. For instance, got to pick a fight with a dead guy sticker. Who doesn't want to pick a fight with a dead guy sticker? I'm just saying, it's a fun thing to do. So, go, don't go, keep listening to the show. It's all good. On that same note, though, if you guys have any recommendations, if anybody out there is like, man, I would just love to see this design or this concept on a t-shirt or a sticker or whatever, get in touch with us. Hit up our email, hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, wherever, and let us know. We're always looking for new and exciting things to put out there, and if you've got a good idea, we are more than willing to use it. So please do. And to speak about our patrons, once again, thank you. Thank you so much to all of you for helping out the show. We've got a nice little stash at this point, so as soon as there's a decent event or tournament nearby, we intend on going to it. But this money that we're getting from it is going to enable us to do more. So if any of you out there have been tempted to become patrons, we would absolutely appreciate it, of course. And that money is going to go into getting us to places, to events, to tournaments, to anything really to do with wargaming that we can think of to put on the show. So, we'd love to bring you all more of that. Help us out. Before we actually get into the story, I know I brought this up a little bit last episode, but this story is lacking in a lot of tactical value. There's not a whole lot to say about, if you pull this feint left or this feint right or obliques or anything like that. There's not a whole lot of that, as I'm sure you've probably caught on. That being said, these are fun stories. I'm actually really enjoying reading through this again because it's really fun to read. And honestly, as I'm going through it, I'm sitting here being like, they got to make a movie about this. I would watch this, or like a limited series or something like that. Like, this is actually a really cool story that I think would look really awesome on a screen someplace. So to any Hollywood executives that we might have in the listener base, wink, wink, because we have those, think about it. Saga of Ref the Sly could be a good movie. I'm just saying. That's where we're at. I'm enjoying reading this. I'm enjoying talking about it with y'all, but I also understand that there's not a whole lot of tactical stuff. It's just a nice little break, basically like an extended fiction focus at this point. But we're going to get right into it with our first section. I want to let you know that we do have Stich on later. Anybody who knows Stich, this is going to be a treat. If you don't know Stich, you're going to in section 2. But first, let us speak of the rise of a legend. We pick up our study of our friend Ref here after he's been struck by Geller. If you'll recall, last episode we were talking about how this guy strikes him twice with the haft of a spear and then rides off and is like, I beat him, he was nothing, I'm so awesome, and Ref did nothing, right? He acts as though he didn't hear anything, as though he doesn't even know about it. Such to an extent that people start to wonder, they're like, is this guy actually... does he have honor? Because you got to return that stuff, right? But nonetheless, our boy Ref, this is where he's at. But before we get too much into it, I do want to introduce another cast of players. Now, I understand with absolute certainty that the number of Thors in this particular story is staggering. Because we had like Thor Bjorn last time around and Thor Gerd, right? So we got some more to add to that. So any of you who are keeping track, I'm sorry, it's a little confusing, but we'll get through it together. Even as we're going through the text, I'll remind you who these folks are. Just kind of want to introduce them first off. First off is Bjorn, who's a farmer at Hild. Then there's Helga. That's Bjorn's daughter, and she is described as being attractive, intelligent, a desirable match, and having a mind of her own. Next is Thormund, who is Helga's foster father and one of Bjorn's workers. Across the way, you have Thorgils. He is also known as Vikerskalli, which means the bald dude from Vic. So, that's a nickname. Apparently there's a lot of bald dudes. I think it was abnormal because there's a lot of people who had that nickname. Regardless, this particular Thorgils is malicious, slanderous, cunning, a difficult person to be around, and the top farmer of Vic, hence Vikerskalli, the bald dude from Vic. He's got 4 sons. The first is Thengil, next Orm, then Thorstein, then Geir. He's got a daughter, Olaf, and she's the wife of a guy named Gunnar. Gunnar is one of the leading men of this western settlement that we'll be talking about later. Lastly, we have Bard, who is a trader and a merchant in the service of the King of Norway. He is known for being sharp-sighted. And then King Harald himself, ruler of Norway. But let's go back real quick. Let's go back to Iceland, where Ref is readying his ship to sail away. Geller stops by, the fellow who, gave him the 2 blows. He stops by to see the boat. And so as he's coming in, and he's got somebody else with him, and they're coming up to see the boat, and Ref notices them. And he comes at them. He's got an adze. And if you don't know what an adze is, it's like A-D-Z-E. It's like a hatchet had a baby with a scythe, and they use it for woodworking. I honestly, go check it out. That's what I think. When I look at it in a picture, I'm like, that is an axe scythe. A terrifying concept, unwieldy as a weapon, one might think. However, Ref says to Geller, now I'll repay your 2 blows for 1. Strikes him in the side and kills him. The other dude runs away. It's like, I ain't messing with that. So Guest is like, that was probably the right thing to do. The guy was bad-mouthing you. You've kind of redeemed your honor. That being said, you might want to go, because this may not go well for you. And so he gives him a crew and supplies for his journey. And Ref sets off going toward Greenland. But they kind of get sidetracked. There's a storm, there's a disturbance on the sea, and they get blown more north than they had intended. And they start to scout the fjords, and they find this one fjord that goes all the way in, very long, between all these glaciers and gorgeous mountains. And as they travel up it, they start to see signs of a settlement up ahead, but it's getting to be wintertime. And in a place like Greenland, where that really means something, they definitely had to stop. And so they stop a little short, they build a temporary hall, and they wait for spring. The next spring, they set sail toward this settlement, kind of a spread out area of different farms, and they land first at this farm, Hild, where we had talked about that before. And Ref comes into the employ of Bjorn, the farmer that runs Hild. Bjorn kind of hires him off the boat. That's what it says in there. He arrives, Bjorn hires him, basically. But one has to think that Bjorn came out and went, wow, that is a nice ship. Because everybody's admired this ship so far. So Ref sails in this gorgeous ship. He's like, that's a nice ship. Ref's like, yeah, I made it myself. And so Bjorn's like, can you build stuff on the property? Just build buildings? And Ref's like, sure, I can do that. And he meets Helga, of course, as we've described as being intelligent, mind of her own, very attractive. So he begins working there. Things are going well. On the other side of the headland lies the farm Vik, and this is run by Thorgil and his sons. Now remember, he's got several of them. His oldest son, Thengil, had asked for the hand of Helga in marriage before, but she had turned him down. Didn't really think him a good match, and knowing what we do about the family, I can't say I blame her. But Ref, later on, after he's been working for Bjorn for a while, asks for Helga's hand in marriage. You have to imagine she accepts. It doesn't say anything about that in the text, but considering the fact that she had refused Thengil when he had asked, there's a heavy implication that this is definitely something she wanted too. And Bjorn, Ref's a nice guy. He's a good guy, hard worker. Yeah, absolutely. So he's all for it. Thormund, her foster father, is all for it. And so everybody's good for this. You can imagine that this may have raked at Thengil a little bit. The only condition, however, that Bjorn has is that that Ref and Helga take over the farm. That they have to be there after, because he's getting old. Bjorn's an old dude, and running a farm like this takes a lot of work. And so they agree, of course. And they take it over, and they see a whole lot of success in there. And again, this is talking about Ref quite a lot. But he's also described as working the whole time, like going out to his boat shed and building things, working on the ships. And again, running a farm is a hard business. Just a normal farm is hard business, let alone a community of 12 or so folks who are all working for you. So I imagine that as he's doing this, Helga is taking over the business of running the farm. But Bjorn's old, and he dies. And they continue to run the farm for 8 years. Again, he's working hard, and he leaves in the evening after getting up at the crack of dawn, and he has his ads there at the workshop, and he leaves it there when he locks up. They end up having 3 kids, him and Helga, Stein, Bjorn, and Thormund, named after their fathers, respectively. So one day, Ref is heading home from work, and of course this is after the 8 years that I had talked about of living here, tending the land, becoming a very wealthy person. He's headed home, and he sees a polar bear ahead of him. And the polar bear sees that he is there as well, alone. Polar bear starts coming towards him, and he says, I'm a pretty good fighter, but I don't think I can take this polar bear on my onesie with no weapons. And so he hustles back toward his boat shed where his adze is, so he can use a weapon actually against the polar bear. In the meantime, however, Thorgil's sons return and find the bear. And so they pull up, they say, okay, here's a bear. They kill it. And Ref gets back, bear's dead, doesn't really think much of it. A little bit less work he has to do. Thorgil's sons return home, and they brag of killing this bear. Of course, killing a polar bear, especially without a rifle, it has to be a difficult thing to do. They're large creatures, angry creatures. We have a few listeners in Canada, and I'm sure you know far better than I do polar bears. We got grizzlies around here, but I'm pretty sure they're a lot smaller than the polar bear. They're huge. So, of course, they're bragging about it. But they also start talking about how Ref chickened out. How they saw that his tracks were leading away in the snow. And at one point, they're like, yeah, and he peed himself too. And they started to just make up all these different things. He's a coward. He has no will. There's no reason to listen to this guy or like him. And they mock him with a couple of different names too. They name him Ref the Timid, Ref the Effeminate, Ref the Gay. At this time, homosexuality was very much frowned upon in this particular culture, and it could get you into a lot of trouble. In fact, part of the rumor that they started to spread is that he was banished from Iceland for his homosexuality. And they start to spread this around, everybody else in the settlement. But Ref acts like he doesn't hear anything, acts completely ignorant of the whole thing, but quietly he is readying his ship, and he arranges with a buyer to sell his land, and he'll let them know when it's going to happen, but he's going to stick around for just a little bit while longer. And this is all done quietly. And so his foster father comes to him and says, Ref, I've been holding my tongue on this, but these guys have been talking a whole lot of crap about you. And it really weighs heavily on one's honor that you have listened to this and haven't done anything about it. And Refs tells him, a man should have his plans worked out before he enters into a great undertaking or incites others to do so. So you have to think that he's got that plan. He's Ref. We know. And so he starts to fashion a huge spear that is good for stabbing and slashing, and it has a shorter haft than like a normal spear. I'm picturing a glaive, personally, is kind of what I have in my head, like a short glaive. Regardless, a very nice weapon with a honed edge, as only a master craftsman can build. And he goes over to Vic, the farm across the way there with the folks who have been spreading all these wonderful rumors, announces himself, and asks for compensation from Thorgils. I think we know where this is going. And Thorgils has a bunch of smoke in his eyes because this is supper time and he's cooking, and he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give you compensation for one thing. We're just joking, man. And on the other thing, I actually believe it. I actually believe the things that I've been saying about you. And Ref kills him. Just runs him through. Now, Ref announced himself to Thorgils because Thorgils could have given him compensation. There could have been a peaceful way to resolve this. Thorgils chose not to, and yet chose to mock Ref yet again. So Ref kills him. I just want to backtrack a little bit. The killing of Thorgil here and the killing of Thorbjorn from our first section, who is the guy who Ref caught with his pounce down, basically. In both of these cases, Ref, basically, it's an honorable thing. He announces himself and says, I'm looking for compensation. He's armed, so it's obvious what he's going to do if he doesn't get it. But he gives them a chance. He gives them a chance in order to redeem themselves, I suppose. Now, Geller, he was a different story. He was running his mouth and kind of the same idea. He also had chances to take it back. He didn't. However, each of these guys was an individual. Easy to kind of walk up and have decent honor when it comes to taking on individuals. But if you'll recall, when Ref killed Thorbjorn, he didn't stick around and fight all of Thorbjorn's staff. He hid. Because he knew, just like we all know, that fighting groups as a one person is a difficult thing, inadvisable. So there's these four guys, these four sons of Thorgil. And no doubt they're going to come looking. No doubt they're going to come and try to get some sort of vengeance for this. And so Ref goes down into the boathouse in the dark and waits. And sure enough, the brothers return in their boat. Thengil jumps ashore first, and he goes into the boathouse to get some rollers to bring the boat up onto the shore. Ref decapitates him. Thorstein is next, and he carries the oars and he's going into the boathouse when Ref runs him through. But before he dies, he's able to shout a warning to his remaining two brothers. Olm and Gear, these two remaining brothers, hide in Ref's boat shed, sure that he will not look for them there. But he does, and he kills them. And he heads back to his farm, and everything's ready. The ferry's loaded. All of his followers are like, yeah, dude, we like you. We're going to go with you. And then he takes his family too, Helga, the kids, and Thormund, and they sail away. Now, Gunnar, remember him. He's the husband of Thorgil's daughter. He's not too happy about this. His in-laws just got destroyed, a father and four sons, in one night. And so they do a little search. And after a while, after they don't find him, he says, there's no way that they survived on the open ocean. And we've searched some of these fjords, and there was no sign of them. So, he's probably dead. We're pretty sure, 90% sure that this guy's dead. Let's go to Norway for a second, across the way. We have Bard. Remember, he's a trader and merchant who's in the service of the king. And originally, he wants to go to Iceland, But the king says, no. Go to Greenland. I would like some walrus ivory. I didn't even know walruses had ivory before I read this. And so he goes, gets into Greenland, and just so happens to land in the same area that we're talking about already. And he winters with Gunnar. And eventually, there's been these rumors, right? These rumors of a dude who was a killer in Iceland, and then he went to Greenland and has kind of been a killer there, a terror. So Bard eventually asks him, is there any truth to this? What's going on with this legend, Gunnar? And Gunnar, he's like, yeah, it's pretty legit. Guy killed 5 people in one night and sailed away into the darkness, and we have no idea where he is. He's probably dead. And Bard says, I don't think so, guy. Like, this guy sounds like he had a plan. In order to pull off what he did, that's a lot of forethought. You're dealing with a very cunning person. And to think that he just haphazardly sailed into a storm and foundered, like that's, I don't know. That doesn't match up with what I'm hearing here. We need to look a little bit further. We need to search a little bit more thoroughly. That's what they do. For a while. They search this fjord and that fjord. Many of them are dead ends. No sign of civilization, no sign of humans. And then, one day, they find some shavings, as though an adze has been going at something. And they say, we know him to be a craftsman. We know him to be a wood builder, so he's got to be around here someplace. And sure enough, they find a fortification, spy it from the shore. And it is beautiful. Absolutely exquisite. It's strong, it's durable, it is made with perfect craftsmanship, as though it was carved out of one single plank. And standing on the battlements is a strong, large man, Ref the Sly. And he mocks him a little bit. What they say, what's going on in there? And he's like, I'm just hanging out. What news of the outside world? And they say, we're not going to tell you. And he says, how far are you guys thinking about going? And they say, we're not going to go any further. So it becomes pretty obvious what everybody's intentions are here. And Bard and Gunnar say, you know what, we're just going to be done with this right now. Burn it. Burn the fortification. So they gather some timber, and they walk it up, and they put it at the base of the fortification, light it on fire, and water comes out of the wall and douses the fire. And they try again. Douses it again. Build one a little bit higher. Water comes out of the wall even higher and douses the fire. Ref kind of comes out onto the walls and says, you guys having trouble? Got anything lit out there? And they're going to go, but they say, we'll be back. We're coming back for you, Ref. And he says, none of you people are going to be the ones that kill me. Straight up. And so they head back. And Gunnar returns to the western settlement, while Bard returns to Norway. He doesn't go empty-handed, though. He goes with a trained polar bear, a board game made of walrus ivory. It's a board game that was very similar to chess. It mentions in the text being able to play the old game and the new. An older version of chess had one single king, and the point was for that person with the king to get it to a particular edge of the board. The other person was to keep them from doing it, kill the king before it got there. And the two king one is the one that we're more familiar with. It wasn't exactly like the one we play, but it's a precursor to chess. Made out of walrus ivory. Pretty cool, right? And then a golden engraved walrus skull. All very flashy gifts. Each one of their own. A very suitable and grand gift. Bard brings them all back and hands them to the king. And one at a time, he gives them to the king, and the king says, this is an amazing gift. What does he want from me in return? A gift like this isn't given for no reason. Bard says he just wants your friendship. Gunnar just wants to be friends, mutually supportive. And so by the end of gift 3, the king suspects something even more. He says, okay, what is this about? And Bard says, well, there's this guy Gunnar up in Greenland, and he's having trouble. He's having some trouble with this guy Ref, and we need to support him because I like this Gunnar guy. And the king says, I don't think you should go back. This sounds like nothing but trouble, and I don't think it's going to end well, so I would really appreciate it if you didn't go back. Bard says, I made a promise. I made a promise to him, and that's kind of my honor, so I need to go. And the king thinks on it for a while. And before Bard is ready to go, King comes to him and says, I think I figured out this water system you were talking about. Because the king was known for being very wise, for having a really sharp mind. And so the king says, I think I know how this works. He has to have some sort of underground piping, right? Because he's a little bit back from the shore, but he's got this water coming out of the walls. So the only thing I can figure, he's got pipes buried deep underground. And those are piping in the water into the main settlement. In case of what you saw, somebody trying to burn him out, or even a siege, having that clean water. And as far as it pouring out, the only thing he could figure is that there were incredibly tiny holes drilled into the wood, that there was like a mold placed in them, and that mold moved out of the way, the water flowed freely out onto whatever fire was underneath it. So between these two things, the king said, this is what you're up against, and honestly, the best thing to do would be to dig down, find those pipes, destroy them, and then try to burn them out. Bard says, that makes sense. King gives him one last warning. Bard, don't go. Don't go back to Greenland. But Bard prepares to set sail and heads back to Greenland. Now we see a lot of things going on here in this particular section, and Stich and I are going to talk about that a little bit more in section 2. But there's a common theme occurring for Ref, and it's just something that I really, really want to stress about this reading, and it's that there is no back and forth. There's no him like attacking someone and then like parry block. Ref is efficient. He plans. He is prepared. Each of these times, when he hears this slander being said about him, he doesn't do anything at the time. He doesn't get up and get mad at people for calling him lazy when he's young. He doesn't get in Geller's face immediately after he starts to lie about the butt kicking that he received. He doesn't even go over to Thorgil and correct him on some of the slanderous things that he was saying. Ref makes a plan, When he gets Geller, he's already on his way out of town. And I think he's already figured it out, because when he killed Thorbjorn, his mom was like, okay, you got to go. And so he left. And then now he's killed Gellir, and he's like, okay, splitting afterwards seems to be a good thing to do. Because even if I'm willing to pay compensation, these guys have relatives. They're going to come at me. And so he knows. And then by the time that we get to Thorgil, he's become even more efficient. He's building specific weapons that nobody has seen him with. Again, nobody knows that he has this gigantic spear that can stab and slash, because he just built it. And he did it in secret, much like the boat earlier on. So Ref doesn't play his hand. He doesn't show his hand before it's good in time. He doesn't want people to know what he's got going on, because how do you prepare for the unexpected? How do you prepare for a gigantic spear if you don't even know he has it? And so he starts to become far more meticulous in the way that he's approaching these things. And again, that's also shown in his killing of Thorgil's sons. One might look at that and say it was a dishonorable act, but what was it? Did he have a better choice? Well, wait for them to come at him in a group? That's not smart. They'd already dishonored themselves. He knew what their response was going to be. And so he was acting out of efficiency there. Again, no flashy moves, no prolonged conflict. When Ref strikes, he strikes hard, and he wins with that strike. But it's not just the strike that matters. It was all the preparation that went into it. The reason he's able to escape and get away from whatever vengeance killing would have come to him for the death of Gellir, he leaves in his own boat that he prepared himself. And the same thing is done here when he's at Hild and starts coming into conflict with the folks from over in Vic. And so I really dig this. Ref is really starting to refine himself as a character, as a hero within this story. The little elements we were picking up in the beginning, he's quiet. People don't necessarily know what he's doing all the time. They assume that he's one thing or the other, and he doesn't correct them because that plays to his strengths. When he was younger, and they thought he was a cold biter, good for nothing, layabout. Well, he was strong, obviously. Runs a seasoned warrior right through. So he didn't care. He didn't care about people's opinions of him because he knew the truth. He knew that he could run them through. Same thing when Gellir was going off about the fight that he won. It's like, I know the truth. I also know that I can take this guy, and I will. Thorgil start spreading their stuff. Makes a plan. He doesn't go on tilt. That's what I like about Ref. You know, he doesn't lose his temper. He's not sitting out here getting spitting mad over all of these slights, all of these insults that he has suffered. He bears it quietly while plotting vengeance. Who doesn't admire that? That's our current state of affairs and where we leave Ref. He's got this fantastic fortress. Everybody is inside, and it seems to be impregnable. But there's folks on the way that have a plan against that. So we'll see how that plays out in the next episode. But for now, I'd love to go to part 2, where we get to speak to a good friend of mine, Stich. Here with me today to kind of talk about some of the concepts that we discussed in our last section is Stich. Those of you a part of the Bellegarth community will know him as one of the preeminent fighters of the West. And as a treat, we got him on this show. How are you doing, Stich?
Oh, I am doing great. I'm so excited today.
Well, I'm excited to have you on, too. Now, I may understand your pedigree, but for the listeners at home, why don't you share a little bit about your wargaming experience?
So, I'm currently sitting on 9 years now in Bellegarth, and I also have about, I'd say 5 of those years now in Amtgard, and then those are pretty much for the war game side. You know, I've been around a lot of really good Warhammer players, things like that, but most of my experience is in the foam fighting side of things.
Sure. And you also do some gaming. I can see that from your apparatus over there that you are not inexperienced at the online gaming either.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The war game side, of online games, get into some shooters, you know, like Call of Duty Warzone. I'm currently really big on Grand Theft Auto RP, so it just it adds an extra element to that. And I guess also the other experience I would have, I do now. How old am I? 31 now, and I've been doing multiple forms of martial arts since I was 8 years old. So I also have that mental side of things too.
All right. Well, it sounds like you have a fairly extensive background in this sort of thing, and I think the theme from all those things you said, it's like preparedness. You don't go into these things blind. It's not something you just picked up and were naturally good at. No, I'm sure that you have some natural abilities too, but to be at a high level of these things, it's something you have to work at. What are some of the background stuff that you put in order to be good at the things that you love?
So I'm a big believer. You know, the first place I heard it from is like how we romanticize samurai in a way. And a big thing I always heard from it was like one of their philosophies was there's a lesson in everything. And so I really stick to that mantra a lot, is if I'm already there and using my effort of time to experience, then I want that experience to give me something. Sure. And so I'll, and you know, coming from a poor lifestyle growing up too, it's like being really thrifty in that sense than just physical items and stuff. It's just I have to make this situation work for my benefit because I don't have any other way. So it's like a very DIY style in that sense. Sure.
Efficiency.
Yeah, definitely. Efficiency is the name of the game for me, for sure.
So in terms of like preparing for the field in Bellegarth, when you throw a highly surgical shot, because when I watch you fight, you're not one for flourishes or for a bunch of unnecessary motion. This efficiency that you talk about, you bring it to the field as well. So when it comes to that perfect shot, when we're talking about that surgical shot that wins the day, what is behind that? What kind of work goes into being able to throw that perfect shot?
So the skill I pride myself in is perception because of that, because my brain, things happen fast around me, and the efficiency part of that is I want as quickly as possible to know what my best guess is, because I play the numbers game at all times. Like that's what I believe everyone's at. So when I see, it's like the intuition from, because I put a lot of practice into it, the intuition will hit me and like it's like an itch. It's like this is what you were looking for, and then that's where the muscle memory will kick in. So I prepare by putting myself in the positions I'm comfortable with, and also really, like I said, really paying attention to fighters, even if I'm not the one fighting them, because that is something I feel lacks a lot is because people want to remember their moments. So it's and I do also have ADHD, so it's since I'm already noticing more than I want to, I just put it to work for me.
Sure, you basically turn into a superpower at that point.
Yeah, I'm very practiced in it, I would say, to where, so then even if I'm doing something here, my brain can still like juggle something to my side, and that's where I have the fun of like back blocking things like that and really like tripping up their brain, because once I'm like know I'm in there and I'm like in their head, that's my realm, and I'm very good at getting someone to fight me at my flow, and I'm very practiced in that flow.
Oh yeah, and like home base is always the place you want to be. Make the other person fight on your turf.
And I definitely have like that's my guilty pleasure, is like I want to be as unique as possible. So I really am practiced in doing things I don't think other people do, which I feel also gives me that edge that I want.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're operating not just from the vein of intuition, which it sounds like serves you very well, but you're also trying to be ahead of the enemy. It's not just an intuitive process, but you're taking what you know from either fighting them or watching them fight, and then using that to say, what are they going to do next? How can I set myself up to anticipate this?
Yeah, and just that also, it's because usually it's multiple things. It's not always one thing. So if I get like a couple examples of things I know they do, my brain intuitively chooses the one I know they think about the least. So that way it's the most unfamiliar territory for them, and it naturally, because when they see something that their brain hasn't really registered a lot before, they subconsciously want to follow it. And you know, it's like the slithering snake, that whole like trope you see in movies and stuff. It's the same concept of tempo shifting and things like that. Is I want, as soon as I know they're in that trance, the tempo shift happens, and then it gives like an appearance of like either vanishing in that one moment, or it's like the trick that like Moses and people would always tell me about, of like whipping the sword in front of someone's face. It resets your brain for a second. So so I'm trying to move on that reset.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. And so, again, it's that kind of idea of not just waiting for the opportunities, but also making the opportunities for yourself.
Absolutely.
And so in this efficiency, I imagine that you're not one to necessarily leave somebody injured behind you, whether it's within the online gaming that you do or within the field gaming that you do. Do you like to leave people with an arm, or leave them with a leg, or are they best dead?
Oh, definitely best dead for me, because I'm a momentum based fighter, to where it's like one gimmick leading into the next one, and so if I leave them, then I give them too much of a chance for the momentum to shift their way. So when I do the points, when I choose to strike, and that's like whenever I'm sparring people, sometimes like you get those extra hits, like they're already dead and it's going. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, like this is like, once I start, my brain already has a set amount of things it wants to do, and it will keep going, because I want to make sure that I finish what I was doing. And usually if in the best possible scenario, I'm stopping on the beat I had already pre-planned, but I'll definitely go in for the kill, because it was like, you know, my brain sees it as my responsibility because I chose to engage them. And usually, especially with the expectations set around me, if like my teammate sees that I'm fighting someone, they're gonna assume either they're gonna hear me yell dead really loud, or that person is no longer a problem. And since I know a lot of people assume that, I'm gonna fulfill that expectation.
I would agree with you. I think leaving somebody behind to just come back and stab you in the back later is not a wise policy. So yeah, that is also part of that efficiency thing, I think. Which it's a very, we've got a theme going for you here that I'm digging. So kind of shifting the gears a little bit, boasting. It's something that I've heard a lot about on both sides. I've heard that it helps kind of get in the head of your opponent. I've heard that it reveals too much of yourself too fast. Do you think that there is a valid reason to be boasting, or is it best to keep quiet about things?
So for me personally, I'm trying to practice more of it. Like I'm very bad at talking myself up. So that's like what I do. So like the other part I do for Bellegarth, you know, like when I have experiences at an event, I'll write about it in like a fantasy setting. which allows me to be more confident because my character is supposed to be like the protagonist of this story, so he has to have that like belief in himself and stuff.
Sure.
And so in actual fighting though, and like when you talk about boasting and stuff like that, it's funny because most of the time it's coming from some of my friends or someone with me is it's coming in the form of a compliment, but they are actually like boasting for me, and I use that as a weapon. So like the way I saw it, and like I would joke with like my friends in Blackwater and stuff, is I would tell them, I'd be like, yeah, the passive skill of my down stick fighting is that every time someone talks about it out loud, it gets stronger because now it is dug into people's brain.
Is being fueled by faith at this point.
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
I dig that. But yeah, it sounds like instead of talking yourself up, there's people around you talking you up. And to me, that makes it more valid. Instead of you standing up and being like, I did this thing, there's other people talking about it instead. And I think that gives it validity.
Right, and that precedence is usually set because I purposely make it a theme for me too, that I always will compliment the people around me. Like even if I know I was doing something, I want, like, because that's the part of the noticing and everything. It's like, hey, just so you know, even though I finished them, they like 25% of their attention was on you because you did that little thing. That was great. Keep that stuff up. And so it's just because that's like, you know, the leading by example like thing. Like that's how I like to live my life anyways, is like if I feel like I figured something out before someone, I don't see it as a competition. I see it as, well, now we all figured it out this fast. Isn't that great?
Right. Yeah. No, I dig that. That's a good way of thinking about it. Kind of the last thing on this idea of boasting real quick is I have seen people who they may get like one kill in a particular fight, and afterwards they're talking about how they wiped an entire side.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think this form of boasting is useful?
It has. You know, there's time and place for everything. Like once again, lesson in everything, and I think it could be useful depending on the people around them if they notice what's going on. Because like if this guy wants to make themselves a target, because more times than not, everyone around them is going to know it wasn't true, so they're going to know it's that kind of a boast, and so that could set like that subconscious thought to where like they're just thinking about it too much. And so that could even help his team. Like some people don't even know. It's like, oh, if you got one of these types of people on your team, they're naturally being a brighter light for you. So you're going to be able to sneak around in those shadows.
Or they draw aggro.
Yeah,
as it were.
Absolutely. Yeah, they draw aggro. Yes, that's a good way to put it.
I can dig that. And I've definitely seen people who are definitely boisterous. You know, they go out there and they're making a bunch of noise. Dio comes to mind. You always know where that man is on the field.
Absolutely.
But it like you say, it works to the benefit, because as everybody shifts their attention to him, the rest of his team can do what they want to do.
That's like if you have the red fighter on your team that shouts red loud enough, then you just wait for that to happen, and you'll see a hole naturally somewhere else, because some people's like consciousness is just naturally moving to that, especially if they're not used to someone being that loud on the field. Right.
No, and one of my previous co-hosts, Oni Shiro, is a very good example of this.
Yeah.
You can hear, like, you know Oni, right?
Yeah. We naturally work well together because he'll just get spotlight on him, and I'm like, cool. So I'll let him be there, and I'll be like 3 people away from him, so it's just enough out of people's like peripherals, and I can just work off them all day.
And as they're sitting there being like, man, this red is just going to town, then you're kind of slipping in between the ribs, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Knife in the dark. So, untrue things, like you said, they can be used, they can't be used in terms of boasting. They can, it's something that can have its place on the field. Off the field, this sort of thing can turn to rumors. And I have seen rumors not just make or break a reputation, but also make or break a larger organization, like a realm or a unit or a team of some sort. What has been your experience with rumors?
So, especially with Belagarth, ever since I started Belagarth, that was like when I first started in life being able to travel and like go to different places. So I've actually, starting out small realm, you have a couple big vets who've been to all the big events. They know people. You just hear these stories of people going around and like and whether they're good stories or bad stories, like everyone has a villain. But then when you actually go to these places yourself and like you don't have any of the people you're comfortable with and you're just in a new place, because it would happen to me a lot, and I would just have to, it would feel like I'd have to learn people, like meet a whole community all over again, even though it's like the same strand of community. And then so you get to see it through your own lens, which is like I like anyways. I like to experience things myself. Like I don't like to give too much grain to those kinds of like conversations.
Sure.
And so you definitely see, and then you can, if you take time to pay attention to it, it's like a big puzzle that you can put together. It's like, okay, I can see how you guys got to this conclusion, and I can see where probably someone used some slightly different words that led you down this thought process. But I can like, but then you can like backtrack to that point, but it was still built on this foundation of who this person actually is. And I think if you got to know that side of it, you would see this is just like one branch on the tree, basically.
Well, sure. I mean, a lot of times when people are talked up, especially in terms of like Eastern fighters, like the way we know of Eastern fighters or vice versa, there can be this legend aspect where you,
Absolutely.
as you said, kind of see them as this paragon of whatever, either virtue or vice, and nobody ever lives up to their own legend.
No. It's like it's fun to have the legend, but it's not. It's yeah. You're definitely like, oh, okay, you know, it's a little bit of that don't meet your heroes like mentality.
Sure. I know at least in some part back in my early 20s. You know, sorry, parents of kids on this particular show. I'm going to make this as vague as possible. I liked to go to parties in my early 20s, and I developed a bit of a reputation for it. And so there were a bunch of people who I've never met in Bellegarth who had heard the stories of some of my less dignified adventures. And so when I'd meet them, they would, like, especially, like I've basically quit drinking at this point. I might have one every now and then, but it's not something that happens. But of course they'll meet and they'll be like, "Oh, you're the party guy," and it's like, "I'm the book guy. I'm the book guy."
I get that a lot. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure, because again, you're another one of those much spoken of fighters. Like people enjoy talking about your exploits. You don't talk about yourself very often. That tempts people. To do it more.
It's like the mystique of it, and then because I like to see it as like a special event thing, you know, like when you're all finally settled, like you're around a nice fire, and people like it just naturally comes in conversation. They're like, hey, like tell us like a story, because that's my big passion, is being a storyteller. So it's like when they give me that stage, that's when I'm like, all right, like you asked, and that's like the magic word. It's like a genie. Like if you just give me the wish you want, like I'll work to grant it. And so I'm just always waiting for those moments. So it feels like it's a together thing. It's not just me, like, because like I said, my biggest problem is like taking up my own space. So I have to my brain sometimes waits for that permission.
Well, you know, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, because we both know folks who go up there and they just shove their stories down your throat. And even if they might be cool stories from time to time, you're like, dude, shut up. I do not care anymore. Yeah,
and you're like trying to be nice, and there's like a whole, you know, the expectations of a part. That's like we call it trapdoor spidering.
Yeah. Snag you with the stories of old, but what you're doing, I think, is so much better, because you wait for people to show interest, and then when you're telling the story, they actually want to listen to it because they wanted to in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And then and like any chance I have, I'm trying to draw other people into it, and like I really like how like the universe speaks sometimes, because people, even if like they're saying something like half as a joke, or you'll hear someone like say some like little name, like maybe something cool happened. They're like, oh, that was like that reminded me of like a falcon or something. Like they say something that leads to it, and you're like, oh, well, now it has like a name tied to it, and that's part of the story going on. Like the big thing for that for me was because in Bellegarth they do my fights to the death with people, so it's like a one-on-one fight, but we plan it months ahead, and the whole time it's like I want them to actually feel the weight of like, what if this is a fight where you're putting your actual life on the line. And then based on what happens there, that's how I write the story. So it's like part of, so like I said, I'm an anime protagonist, because I'm writing that story is me and Shai will fight based on if he won the fight, you know, that means during the arc where we fought each other, he ultimately will win that fight. And based on what happened in the fight, I find little details to write that story out.
Sure.
And that includes them into it.
I think that's really cool too, where it's an inclusive storytelling thing, not just this is what I say about myself, but it's also this is what we're saying about ourselves and each other. And I think those sorts of stories live on longer because it's less associated with one person or their glory or their exploits, and it has more to do with a group experience, really.
Yeah, because that's the part that's the best thing I got from Belagarth was this really thriving community, and like the first place where really I could be myself, because even as a kid, like I had a hard time playing pretend in front of adults. And so when I first came to Belagarth, because that's like the expectation you think you're having because they're all pretending to kill each other, so that bled into it. So it's like, oh man, and I see that in a lot of newer fighters too, is like their first, like you're seeing they're getting comfortable, and it's not just them getting comfortable with like wanting to be good or fighting with weapons. They're getting comfortable because they know people on the outside are watching them.
Right.
And that's like I think that's one of the biggest hurdles.
Sure, and I imagine that wasn't as difficult from you coming from a martial arts background and being observed in that way. But no, I absolutely see it too. People go out there and they get a little freaked because they're so exposed. It's not just you and the other person, but there's everybody else all around too. Yeah,
but it helps you like if you're willing, once again, that lesson there, it helps you find out a little more who you are, because especially once you feel empowered with like once the skill starts setting in and you really feel like you're going into your own. It's more than just that fighting aspect. It's because you're mentally setting yourself on a path because of muscle memory, because of the mental games involved. Like whenever you fall for something, it's like you're just getting that experience, those experience points straight to your brain. Like it's buffing it.
Right. And I think there's a valuable lesson to be learned in being able to ignore the fact that there are people on the sidelines, not letting it mess with your head. I mean, I can't remember the last time that I cared. And I don't mean that as like a super jaded, dismissive way, but when I'm on the field, when I'm looking at my opponent, I don't really care who's standing on the side. I don't care if there's a pretty girl or a pretty guy watching me. I don't care if there's my ex-mentor over there. It's me and my opponent,
Yeah, and that was a hard part for me a lot, and that like I know that's tied to because when you're a kid, one of the biggest because I definitely am the type of person that picks stuff up quickly. So as a kid, like people that can't process that, the first thing they always throw at you is like, oh, you're showing off. And that echoes in my brain constantly whenever I'm doing anything, like even when I'm doing like my dancing, like roller skating, stuff like that. It's the same thing. It's like, I don't want it to be seen as showing off. I want people to see it as the possibilities of where they can also be. And I want them to feel that all they have to do is like ask for it, and I will extend the hand and just be like, all right, here's what I did. If it doesn't work for you, that's one possible way out of the way. So now you're that much closer to figuring out what will work for you.
Or making the skill more accessible to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I dig that. And there's a skill that is not shared. It dies. I take joy personally in teaching other people how to beat me.
Right.
Most of my students, when I'm working with the high school, they come in and they're with me for 4 years. And if they're not good at killing me by the end of it, I feel like I failed, because I try to teach them kidney wraps. I try to teach them knee drops, like all of these little like dirty feints and tricks. And most of the time, they're all very good at killing me by the end of those 4 years, and not just me, but other people as well. But that's kind of the idea. I want to share my secrets.
Yeah, and because that helps me. Because like I said, being a momentum fighter, it's always me stacking on whatever just happened, which means they make that a more interesting game when they start picking up the like first level tricks. Because when I was in Utah, they actually have like a child centric practice. It's like for like younger kids to teens and stuff, and like the adults will go out there and play with them too. So it's still the Belagarth rules, but it's like the hit calibration isn't a thing. So you can still, like the kids, they can hit you as hard as they're able to, and it'll still count on you. And then so out there I had a lot of opportunity because, like I said, I have that martial arts experience, and I'm actually licensed a licensed instructor in Tang Soo Do. So I would bring a dojo setting to teaching these kids so I can help build up their natural muscle memory, And then from there, that means when they're at practice, they're allowed to just do whatever they want, and because they're not thinking about it, because they're just kids, like they don't have that complex thought. So you're just watching their muscle memory build in a way that like you wouldn't be able to, and it's like mind blowing to watch it happen.
Oh yeah, I mean the kids that are raised in this tradition, they're insane. Like I came in when I was 15, and I feel like it gave me a certain leg up over or some people who came in later because of that muscle memory thing that you're talking about. But I know folks whose parents were in it, and they were raised in the sword fighting community, and they're like scary good because it just comes naturally to them, you know?
Yeah, and that's like I'll be out there for hours fighting kids just because it's like I'm learning so much off them, and they don't even know they're teaching, and that's what makes it like an extra special thing even.
Oh, that noob foo is real though.
Yeah.
If we can, because like it's always something strange. It's because they don't know the rules yet. They don't know how they're supposed to do it, so they're just throwing stuff out there.
Yeah, no expectations except for just hit them hard enough where it's gonna count, and that's all. And that's all they're doing. And it's, you know, I've had a couple moves that I've developed just from watching really strange fighting, and it usually does come from newer fighters or something they're trying out. And then when I see it, I'm like, hey, let's try to build on that real quick. That looked sick. And I'll sit there and theory craft with some people. We'll get some crazy shots because once you start stacking moves, the best way to reset it is to do something completely out there. Because if it works, if it works, that's all they're thinking about, and you can just start doing the things you were doing before again. So you can just that's like what like my spin shots and stuff like that are for. Is it's meant as a mental reset, and then they forget everything they were thinking about because they're just like, I can't let them spin on me again. There's no way. That's like all that's going on in their brain.
But if you were to use them all the time, then it would just become commonplace, and it wouldn't have the same psychological impact. Yeah,
and that's the thing. Like, and I always tell people this because, and that's part of that rumors part you were talking about. Actually, is a lot of people know me as someone that like does wacky things or spin shots, especially in the West. A lot of people talk about my spin shots and stuff, and I always tell people, I'm like, like I only throw them like, and being even nice, only like 5% of the time. It's just that's the part people remember, and so if they speak about it loudly enough, it sets that as a heavier expectation, and so that leads into like special feints that no one else sees because no one knows what like a feinted spin shot really looks like until it became like part of the newer meta. Right,
and it works on newer fighters too, because if they've heard the legend of the Stich spin shot, then when they go against you, they're like, oh, where is it gonna come from?
And that's always like because like one of the things I'm really good at is I can run lines in a bear pit really well because of that. Because you recognize who, like, probability-wise, like, all right, it's going to work on him the best, which means even if I die from it, it doesn't matter because the risk versus reward is so good that if I landed on him, I have guaranteed the next 3 people they're mine.
Because you just got in their heads.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I dig that. Well, I think but before we go, I do want to talk to you a little bit about networking. You were talking about the importance of community, the importance of building people up around you. And do you do that in a targeted way? Like for instance, if you need a crafter in the group, like a seamster or somebody who works with sewing, is there a purposeful acquisition of somebody like that into your life, or do these things just kind of grow naturally?
For me, they definitely just grow naturally. Because I want to give everyone a fair shot, and the only time that I don't is like because like because I said, just because of my upbringing, like I'm very skilled at like seeing certain red flags before like they really become a thing, and so it's more of a like and that's where I'm just trusting an instinct is like, oh, I don't know if I want to get fully into this part, but I still have to let them know through example. And that's where like I'm a little cheeky sometimes is like I'll act a way that I know is completely against how they think things should be, and I'll do it right in front of them with other people who are also in agreement, and it kind of it's like a positive peer pressure kind of sinking in on them, and then they start because then you see the gear turn a little bit. They're like, well, what do I normally do in this situation, and why did I think that was okay? How come his is completely different and he's getting the result I wanted to get? And then it really like turns those gears and stuff.
Sure. No, I dig that. And that's a nice way to go about it. It leads to genuine relationships, you know, because they're people that you enjoyed being around to begin with, and so when they become part of your social network, as it were, it's something that's already comfortable for everybody.
Yeah, and it's just because same thing. Like I want people to come up and interact with me, and I want those chances to talk about things, which means you need to be encouraging in that way. And because of the nature of, especially when I'm fighting, because I'm so in my own head that I just stop. I stop giving like facial signals or anything. I'm just fully in it, and some people see that as an intensity. And so I have to, whenever I'm not fighting, really show them that like I'm very open. It's like I'll laugh, I'll crack jokes. It's like that's why I love Blackwater so much, because we'll just crack jokes that like people see as like us being young mentally and stuff like that. And it's just like, oh, we're just literally vibing and having a really good time, and we're showing you're allowed to do it not only with us but just in general.
I like that. That's a really good mentality, and I am sad to have to cut this short because I am really enjoying our conversation. I would love to have you back on the show at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk just about anything and everything. So I'm definitely down.
Well, we talk a lot about those things on this show, so looking forward to having you back at some point, sir. But as for the rest of you, we are going to move on to the second portion of our discussion of the Age of Stirlungs. So let's finish up our study of the Age of Stirlungs, Iceland's most bloody conflict internally, with a lot of strife, a civil war of sorts. So where we come in, if you recall from last episode, we had just finished with the largest land battle in Icelandic history, which was the one of, Earliskeiðatur. Yeah, we're going to go with that. And what that did is it left the Aspernings in charge, and Kolbeinn the Young. They're the most prominent group in the land now. They decide what goes on. Around this time, Snorri Sturluson, you'll remember that he was the guy who was originally in charge of the Sturlungs, and then he was ousted for a more aggressive candidate, sent to Norway. Well, he's sent back to Iceland because he supported an attempted coup against the king. Not smart. And folks there in Iceland get the instruction to make sure that he kind of disappears. So in 1241, a group of assassins led by Gissur Thorvaldsson of the Haukdælir, they kill Snorri. As a group. Remember that from the first one where Ref was like, I ain't fighting a group. Well, this is why. They tend to win. A year later, in 1242, Thorgar Sigvatsson, this is Snorri's brother, returns home from where he's been just kind of adventuring abroad. And he's looking for vengeance. You can't imagine why. His father and his brothers were all killed within this little internal conflict. I cannot imagine why he would be mad. But he's not hasty. You might expect somebody who returns presumably in some sort of emotional state, even if it's not overt. You think that they would be rather rash in their decision-making. But not this guy. No, Thorgar is extremely smart about this. He's a good leader, for one thing. And he builds his power, slowly, reacquiring the strength that the Sturlungs once had. And builds like a power base with allies, brings people together. Slowly, smart, until he's finally got a group that is large enough to do something. He's got to breathe some life back into the Sturlungs. And this kind of escalates till on June 25th in 1244, there's the Battle of the Gulf. And this was the only battle in Icelandic history where both sides were Icelanders. And this took place in Hunaflói Bay. If you're looking at a map, it's kind of up there in the northwest. Most of this action that we talk about throughout the Age of Sturlungs takes place in the northwest of Iceland. So in this bay, you had the Sturlungs, led by Thorgar Sigvatsson, versus the Aspernings. Aspernings. I am so bad at this. I am so sorry to anybody from a Nordic-speaking country. I'm butchering your language. But anyways, those guys. And they're being led by Kolbein the Young, our friend again. And the Sturlungs have 15 ships under their command, and the Asbernings have 20 ships. Now, the outcome of this battle is really fuzzy. History doesn't know much about it. The casualties are unknown, and the results are fairly inconclusive. It doesn't really give one side or the other a clear advantage. But what I can tell you is that the primary weapon during this battle were rocks thrown between the boats. I'm not sure how I'm picturing this. Is this like a shot put scenario? Are we talking about like a slingshot? Wouldn't be big enough for a catapult? I just don't know. I have so many questions. As a rock user myself, I must know how this is used in a naval conflict. Anyway, obviously it wasn't that effective because the results were inconclusive. And there's some more fighting. There's some more minor conflicts for the next 2 years. But in 1246, April 19th, we had a rather decisive battle that took place. It was the Battle of Haugesness. Yeah, sure. Again, we have the Sturlungs, our main guy, Thorgur Sigvatsson. But Kolbein the Young was, in fact, getting old. And so his son has stepped up. Now, this is Brandir the Infant, because, the original guy was Kolbein the Young. No, his name is Brandir Kolbein's son, right? The Infant. No, that's not part of history. Don't write that on your test. So under the Sturlungs, you had about 500 men, give or take. And for the Asbern, I even practiced this before the show. I swear to God. Asbernings, yeah. They have about 600 men. Now the losses here, this was the bloodiest conflict in Iceland's history. So it's kind of cool. Over the course of this age of Sturlungs, we had some really big firsts and some standout things that have just kind of been around for the last, 1,000 years? A little short of 1,000 years. You have the largest battle, or the only naval battle between the Icelanders, and then the bloodiest battle. So this is a fairly influential time when we're talking about Icelandic history. The losses. So the Sturlungs lost about 40 men, and the Asbernings lost around 70. And this was a victory, a solid Sturlung victory here, and it effectively marked the end of Asberning rule. The Sturlungs were back in preeminence. Now you'll notice, through all these fights, that Thorgur and Gissur, Gissur Thorvald's son, they never fight. You think they would, because Gissur Thorvald's son was leading the mob that killed Snorri, this guy's brother. Now the reason for this was because they were both vassals of Norway. And this was significant. The Norwegian king didn't want the people who served him fighting amongst themselves. And so they had to kind of put their beef away. And they did. And Thorgur comes to ascension, being, the head of the group that is in control. And he rules Iceland almost autonomously from 1247 till 1250. But things are breaking down this whole time. You've got several other minor conflicts. There's attempted assassinations all over the place. Very not, quote-unquote, Viking behavior. A lot of the things that take place during this time are completely against the code of honor that we had discussed. Completely against the code of decency. And so after these years of strife, these years of bloody, senseless conflict, the Icelanders agreed to submit to the King of Norway. And this is the end of the Commonwealth. And they don't get their independence again until the early 1900s. So thus ends the Age of Sturlungs, Iceland's most violent and turbulent period in their history. One has to wonder, how cool is it? How peaceful of a country do you have to be that this is your worst period of conflict? I'm from America. And our bloodiest war was the one we had with ourselves, which far outstrips the combined other wars that we've had. Outstrips by far World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Spanish-American War, Iraq, Afghanistan. None of them holds a candle to the number of American lives lost in the American Civil War, which, come to think of it, was more than the entire population of Iceland right now. So it's context. Obviously, we have way more people here, but this, I don't know, this speaks to a whole lot of, and I don't know much about Icelandic culture from here on out. I study military history. And so Iceland being a peaceful nation and not involved in war after this, well, except for the conflict that we're going to cover next episode. I'm looking very much forward to it. The name may sound silly, but it actually had fairly serious international complications. So that's just a little teaser for that next one. But no, yeah, I don't know. And I'm sure that if there's an Icelander listening to this, they're like, we have our internal issues like everybody else. We have parties that disagree and protesters and all that sort of thing. And I'm sure, I'm sure it hasn't been all roses. Nothing ever is. That's not history. Wouldn't be interesting if it was. But my point stands. And this is, I don't know, this was kind of a cool thing to look at too, because you have this slow breakdown of the honor system, of this binding group of principles that tells us what's okay and not okay, as the desperation for the rulership here accelerates. In my opinion here, the Sturlungs achieved what is called a Pyrrhic victory, which is where you technically win, but you don't really win. Like in this case, they won all these battles, and they kind of won out as being the de facto rulers of Iceland, but it came at a cost. And inevitably, they weren't able to preserve that fragile peace. So, like I said, they may have won in this particular case, but they didn't really win. And this term Pyrrhic victory goes back into antiquity. We will cover that battle at some point, but if you're curious about it, just look up the origins of it. It's actually a pretty cool story. But yeah, I'm not sure if there's much more to say about this. The Age of Sturlungs comes to an end. And Norway takes over at that point. And next time we'll talk about a conflict that Iceland had with another nation. In fact, a superpower, one of the world's superpowers. So look forward to that. That's our show. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't had enough of the art of wargaming in your life, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram, where I occasionally post funny and educational memes. If you want to get in touch with the show directly, you can email us at artofwargamingpodcast@gmail.com with any questions, comments, or concerns that you might have. Also be sure to check out all of our sister shows on the Earworm Network, including General Nerdery, Word Balloons, Fried Squirms, and more. We're working hard on having something for everyone. And again, you can find those at earworm.com. That's EARVVYRM. You can also find that in the show notes. But for now, this has been Yaga Malark, signing off.